Well, hello, and welcome back. I'm AJ O'Neill. This is Beyond Code Live, and we're going to continue with the blog project. We're taking a break from the payment processing project. This is actually kind of bloggy, kind of authy. We're going to deal with cookies and refresh tokens. But before we do a couple of things, one, I'd like to thank our sponsor, but not actually our sponsor, Mountain Dew. It is time to, say it with me, open focus. Delicious. And with that out of the way, also I started doing this new thing at the beginning of each session, a who to follow. And I'll do it kind of per day because doing it more often than that isn't going to work out. If I'm doing multiple streams in a day, I don't know if I come up with that many people to follow. But so today's pick for who to follow would be Ethan Garofalo. And oh no, whoops, what happened there? So this playlist, I put this playlist together. This is talks of his from different conferences and events, etc. I think that this is perhaps, this is kind of the cream of the crop of his stuff because he doesn't have all of his disparate talks put together on his channel. But he is the microservices dude, and more than just microservices, it's really about event stream architecture. I often stumble on the words for it, but anyway, and then there's his channel. Anyway, that's in the doobly-doo. So if you check in the doobly-doo on YouTube, that's there. But just want to give you some tips on who else to follow. And if you've got a who to follow, go ahead and comment and let me know who that is. And with that out of the way, I obviously have got the comment. Well, I guess not obviously, but I've got the comments open and the chat open. So we'll just go ahead and get started, and I will try to get something implemented within the next hour and some change so that I can get to bed. So let's go attack this problem head on. What we have here is every time the page refreshes, it's going to, every time the page initializes, we're going to hit this API auth and refresh. And the purpose of hitting API auth and refresh is that we don't know whether or not we have a valid cookie, session cookie. And, garbage. There's going to be, when we go to deploy this to the production, I'm going to have a little bit of problem with this, aren't I? Hold on, I have to think about this for a second. Okay, well, I'll deal with the production issue later. Let me talk about the core value of what this does. So when you log in, you can set a cookie. And you can only really set first-party cookies these days because browsers block everything else, with some special exceptions sometimes for Google Auth and whatnot. But that's where it's got the iframe overlay where it lets you click. It logs you in and just lets you click OK. We can't have nice things except unless you're Google because they make exceptions for Google. But anyway, so we can't, in JavaScript, we can't access those cookies. Those are secure HTTP only same site cookies. And so we just have to make the request and see if we get back, here's a JWT or a token for your session to be used in your API requests, or if we get back an error that says, hey, you're not logged in. And right now we're getting back an error that says you're not logged in. Now the problem that I'm going to have to face, which is really troublesome, is that because bliss.js.org, I don't actually have the ability to set cookies on that domain because I don't have that domain. So I don't know how this is going to work. It's not necessarily intended to have a backend. What may have to happen, let me think about how to do this, because you can't open an iframe to do it anymore. Gosh, how does this work? I have to think about this. There may not be a way for front ends that don't have an explicit backend to do logins anymore. I'm gonna have to talk with some people and think through this. I don't think static I don't think static sites can do login, persistent login anymore without storing things in local storage. Which, by the way, I'm not really against that, because that's another rabbit hole. But you'll hear people say don't store auth in local storage, and most of the time they're just parroting what they've heard from somebody else, and they don't understand what that is. It's the same with all security, really. When people talk about many things, security, best practices in programming, etc., a lot of times they're parroting what someone else has said that applies broadly. Kind of the 80-20 principle. This rule applies 80% of the time, but then, or at least is a good idea 80% of the time. But 20% of the time is a huge percentage of the time. If you had a 20% chance of being hit by a bus, you wouldn't go to work that day, right? So, anyway, and I see, we had somebody jump on for a second there, but I was going to say hello and welcome. Anyway, so the reason that there's a problem with storing things in local storage is predominantly if you have lots of different places that you're getting JavaScript from and you can't guarantee the security of those places. So if you are using your own static hosting for your JavaScript, then this is not a problem. And if you are sanitizing your HTML so that people can't put script tags in, if you're always using inner text, this is something that typically you can go through your whole code base and you can find, especially with the modern frameworks, React, Angular, whatever, Vue, pretty much all of them, as far as I'm aware, they all have a syntax that is a safe syntax, that's a normal syntax, and then many of them also have an insecure syntax, so that if you're going to put some script, if somebody were to put some script into, say, a comment, and you were to display that comment, whether you're using React or Angular or Vue or whatever it is, if you're using the normal syntax, the safe syntax is going to get sanitized, it's going to go in there as text. So anyway, this is why the one of the biggest arguments against putting tokens in local storage, and if you just don't load all sorts of things willy-nilly, you don't have to worry about that. Anyway, but let me go ahead and get logged in here to beta. Hello. Would I do some, hey Thelon, would I do some front-end related streams in the future? I probably won't do anything on React because I don't like React. I fundamentally really don't like React. I have a very particular way of programming, as you may have noticed. Again, creedsofcraftsmanship.com. A lot of the things that I believe in, creedsofcraftsmanship.com. And let's see, does that go through on both? Yeah, okay, that went through on both YouTube and Twitch. Cool. So those are links to various talks and whatnot. And I think that React goes against good design principles, and just on 100 different levels. So I do front-end stuff, but I just use JavaScript. I don't use the alternative languages such as JSX and Vuex and all that. I stick with JavaScript, and I keep my stuff fairly simple. And yeah, things get hairy, and I have to deal with state management and yada yada. But as far as I can tell, I haven't run into a person that doesn't have to deal with those things. It's a pick your poison, whether you're picking React or whatever else. You still have to handle those problems. They don't disappear. So I am going to be doing a little bit on the front end today, but you won't be able to tell because it's just going to look like JavaScript. There's not going to be anything, particularly fancy about it. Okay, so let's trace this problem. So the problem is, I guess it starts with the login, because here we're seeing the end of the process. We're hitting the refresh and there's no cookie. Let's just go ahead to that place in the code. Let's see. But by the way, I finally took a glance at Svelte. People told me that it was similar to React, so I just had a gut reaction. Ugh, I don't have anything to do with that. But I saw a demo of it, which I don't know if it's the current version or if it's up to date, but it looked very simple. It was, here's an HTML tag, here's a script tag, here's a style tag, and that's a component. And there, as far as I could tell, in the example, there wasn't any crazy, new language extensions or anything of that nature. It was just plain, straightforward HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And I thought that was pretty cool. If that's what Svelte is, then maybe I could get behind Svelte. But let's see. We're going to need to go to OIDC. I think Auth 3000 is really what I want to be. I think that is at my top level here. Let me go to server.js. I don't know if it should be at my top level, but it is right now. So Auth 3000 is the auth library that I wrote to handle various logins. Let's see. So we're currently only using GitHub, though I'm not sure if I've got Google set up to work or not, but it's fairly trivial to get it set up. I just have to get the client ID. I don't even need the client secret. I just need the client ID. I've got most of the code is already here. Okay, and I've got my refresh and exchange. So what's going to happen is there's a couple of different strategies. So this is the OIDC, the OpenID Connect strategy. This is the OAuth 2 strategy. And even though I'm not actually doing anything with it right now, we have the accounts.google.com is the OpenID Connect. What's the word? It's not provider. What's it called? Issuer. So accounts.google.com is Google's issuer for OIDC. And then here, github.com, what I think is considered a provider. I don't know if they're considered an issuer because it's OAuth 2, not OpenID config. It's one of those differences of words that doesn't really matter that much. It's nuanced difference. But so we got those two things set up. And this is basically saying we want to allow those strategies. And then the auth.login, we'll go there real quick. Well, it's in libauth, so we'll go there in a second. But that basically, if the auth process is successful or successful enough, then the login function is called, and that's where the tokens and the cookies and whatnot need to be issued. And then here we have an exchange. So we're saying that the refresh is also a strategy, and exchange is also a strategy. Refresh is you give me a cookie and I give you a new token. Exchange is you give me an ID token and I give you an access token. So ID tokens are typically long-lived, meaning they might last days or months. Access tokens are short-lived typically, so they might last minutes or hours. And then logout is deletes the cookie, deletes the session from the database, etc. is what it's supposed to do. But right now, these are pretty much stubbed out as nothingness. And that's what we got to fix. So we got to fix this in a couple of different ways. Oh, whoops. Let me go ahead and grab index here. So exchange is throwing new error not implemented. And let's see, I think the cookies actually are set in this scenario. And I think we're going to need to issue an ID token that we're going to have to put in local storage, because I don't think that the cookie stuff is going to work out. Because while I'm doing this, the demo is blissapi.rootprojects.org, but the real site is bliss.js.org, and that is not a site I have control over. So the API is still on blissapi.therootcompany.com is the production site for that. So we've got, when it comes to cookies, we've got some issues that we're going to have to deal with that are unpleasant. Now, speaking of unpleasant issues, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of all the local storage for this, except for, I think I will keep the, where is it at? The key. I think I'll keep the key, but I'm just going to start deleting these things. Okay, last sync down. There, we'll keep the key, the encryption key, but I'm going to delete all the rest of this stuff. Oh gosh, this is just a ton of things here. Those backups and stuff, I guess. All right. So there we are. I'm going to refresh. We got nothing. That's great. And I'm going to do a GitHub sign in. And then boom. Whoa, wait. That wasn't what I was expecting. Why did that redirect to here? I got to think about that for a second. I think I didn't regenerate some environment variables or something. Let me check and see what we got going on here. Example.env cores domains. Yeah, that makes sense. Server.js, public CNAME, readme. Okay, that's a little bit strange there. That I wasn't. Login URL should be .env app URL. So let me go check this out in another window real quick. I'm going to check my .env file. I think I may have I think I might have set my env file to be the production app URL. So I'm going to go check on that real quick. App URL, and indeed I do have it set to. That's why. Okay, app URL. And the reason that I need to do this is, let's see. That's the only place it's used? Huh. That's interesting. All right, well. Trying to remember why I would have, maybe I must have just been testing something. Oh, it's probably when I first deployed the front end. I think I was still using this as the back end. Oh, bless me. And so I put the wrong, whatever, it doesn't matter. So we're just going to go in here and I'm going to save. I have this set up with watchexec also at webinstall.dev so that anytime I save a JS file, it reloads the server. So that's why you never see me reload the servers, because every time I make a change, it's reloading. So let's go back there because that wasn't quite what I wanted. All right, let's just go there. Okay, great. And then let's do the GitHub sign in, and then it should redirect back to here. Excellent. Cool. So that worked out all right. And the silly thing is that I did not have my DevTools open when I did that, so I didn't actually see what happened. I'd be interested to know what that error was. All right, so now we're getting a 500 error, but I think this is the not implemented. Let's go check and see. Let's see what we can CCC. In the bottom of the deep blue CCC. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking whether I want to continue this direction or not. And I do. Yeah, so the unexpected error is error not implemented. So nothing too mysterious there, because we just looked at that code and we just saw that that's what it says. It says not implemented. So we've got to fix this. Let's see, and we've got to fix Exchange, and we got to fix logout. And to do this, let's see. Let me walk through the code a little bit because I need a refresher, and then anybody that's hasn't watched the first 27 sessions of this probably needs a refresher too. So, whoop, okay. I'm gonna make the screen just a little bit wider. Sorry, I know it makes the letters smaller, but I need to see a little bit more at a time here. All right, so I'm going to walk you through this and kind of explain what's going on. So this login function is called when a strategy gets to a point where it basically has done all that it could do. So in the case of the GitHub login, when the GitHub login is complete, the login function is called. In the case of username and password, the login function is called once it gets the username and password. Basically, when everything that needs to be there has been completed, the login function gets called. All 3,000 handles all of the other stuff. But the login this is a little bit different from more traditional libraries, because this is based around the idea that you log in once and you set some user details in the token, rather than repeating the login logic every single time a user approaches. So anyway, here we have OAuth 2 strategy, got the GitHub stuff, and that's all we're really implementing right now. And then we do a find or create on the user. And then we create a token ID. And if we have an identifier, meaning an email address or a phone number or a user ID from a service such as Google Sign-In or GitHub Sign-In, we can use that. Okay, so this stuff is what goes into the ID token. So when you log in, you get an ID token. And then the exchange would be if we have a cookie, then we need to be able to exchange the cookie, which this, when the login function, this returns the type of tokens that you should be granting. So claims are for general things that are going to go in any token, whether it's an ID token, access token, etc. Then there's an ID claims, and access claims, and a refresh claims, which they have some default values according to when they need to be used. So for the exchange right here, essentially what we want to do is this is only going to be called once the token is validated. So basically we can do claims equals rec.jws.claims. And we're going to have, what we need to do is check that user is still allowed to log in. So we want to check this session is still valid. So one thing that we need to do here that we don't have here is insert session token into database. So that is going to mean essentially the JTI. And this is, kind of complex. There's quite a bit that's already set up, but a JTI is an identifier for a token. I think it means, I think the J is for JWT or Jose. I think the T is for token and the I is for ID. They keep these things are called claims. They typically keep the keys of them to 3 letters for most of the things that are in the official spec. And this is basically an ID. So when you issue a token, it's similar to issuing a cookie. And you cannot assume that just because you've told the user's browser, hey, you can't log in anymore. You can't assume that they actually can't log in, because they could store that information. They could store that cookie, they could store that token, whatever. So you want to have, with any sort of authentication detail, you want to have some sort of ID that you put in a database. And you don't necessarily need to check this every single time, but if you're doing some sort of exchange or refresh process, the process that happens, say you have your short-lived token is 2 hours and your long-lived token is 72 hours. Whenever you're doing that 72-hour, whenever you're doing that 2-hour exchange for a new token, that's when you want to go check and see, is the longer living token or the cookie, the ID token or the refresh token that's in the cookie, is that still valid? And that's what this JTI is for. And so we're going to need to add a sessions table to the database, and we're going to need to have that JTI in it. And then essentially, I think all we're going to need to do here is check that the session is still valid, and if it is, we just reissue an access token. So I'm going to think about what exactly that means. I don't think we necessarily have to have anything there. So this might simply be that we return, our claims. What I like to do, which is technically against the spec, but what I like to do is use the same JTI, and I might change my mind on this. But the reason is this. It kind of keeps, and I probably should use a different value. Maybe I could use SID for session identifier. So maybe I should do something like this. Because the JTIs technically should be unique to every token that's ever issued. But my thought process is that any child token, so that you've got the ID token or the refresh token, that's the long-lived token. So any child token of that, I give the same ID so that I know if I need to invalidate if I blacklisted that JTI, if I blacklisted the parent token, then I blacklist the children tokens as well. And that's kind of my my thought process for it. So we're going to need the JTI, we're going to need the sub, which is going to be claims.sub. And these are specific terms. So JTI is the token identifier, sub is the subject. It means the user ID and the principal user ID, the primary user ID, not an email address or a phone number, but the one it's either the principal ID or the pairwise ID. Okay, let me read the comments here. Can you please explain why the check for longer valid tokens needs to be checked with shorter lived ones as well? It doesn't necessarily, but as we implement this code, this will become more clear. Talking about it without the code is a little bit difficult, but we'll get the code there. Also, does shorter lived token give different rights versus long lived one? So yeah. So let me just put in here. I'm gonna comment this out. Well, let's see. In this one, this is what we'll do. So we'll say this gives us an access. So we're going to have access claims for an access token. And what access stuff should we grant? I don't know. I'm just going to leave it blank, actually. So to do, check that the user is still allowed to log in. So access tokens typically give access to something specific. They are akin to a hall pass. Yeah, a hall pass. So a hall pass allows you to be in the hall. It doesn't allow you to be in the cafeteria or in the parking lot. It allows you, I don't know in other countries if they call it a hall pass, but when you're in grade school, if you want to go to the bathroom, you have to get a hall pass. And usually it's some sort of totem or a card or something fairly large that you have to carry with you that you get from the teacher, and then the hall monitors see that you're allowed to go. And that's like an access token, whereas an ID token is more akin to a state ID or a passport. A passport doesn't actually say where you're allowed to travel. It just identifies who you are when you do travel. Now, obviously, within the European Union, within NATO, and there's different political environments that allow you to use a passport without having a visa, but the visa is your authorization and the passport is your identification. And that's the difference between identification can last for a very long time. My passport lasts for 10 years, but authorization can last for a very short time. A visa typically is somewhere between a couple of weeks. Well, I think usually they're at least a couple months, but they're somewhere between a couple of months and maybe a year or two. Visas don't typically last longer than that. Same type of thing with the ID token versus access token. And an ID token can be used as a refresh token. So the ID token typically has details that you want to perhaps display on the front end, such as the email address or the username or the nickname. And these are actually specified. So I'm going to go OIDC errata set. That's how I find it. So if we look for given name. That's weird. Normally it's, what? Did I click on the wrong one? Core 1.0. Interesting. Yeah, this is it. There we go. Standard claims. Whoa, why is this suddenly in... What the heck? Why are my search results getting all weird on me? Why am I getting Japanese? What's going on? Maybe if I just get rid of the Japan? I don't know what happened. My search results used to be so good. I guess there's just a little fluke in the... Here we are. This is the one that I was intending to get to. Let me make sure that's bookmarked. And this is... Can I... Dang it. I hate it when you have to go back up to the... Oh, do I just click on this thing and it takes me back up to the top? Yes, it does. Okay, so where was that 5.1 standard claims? Here you go. So these are standard claims for... I think this includes ID tokens and access tokens. Usually they don't specify a whole lot of stuff. But a claim, it's specific language because it's... the comments you add is super helpful to understand your code and the thought process. Good, I think. Typically when people say just some feedback here, they mean I'm going to give you some constructive criticism. So I think you're just saying this is positive feedback, which I also accept constructive criticism as well. Okay, but I'm gonna paste this to you. So this is the OIDC Core 1.0 standard claims. And claim means, so for example, I can claim that I am over 21. But that is a claim. That's a claim that I make, and the claim needs to be validated. And so with the tokens, the specific language is you can get a token. The token can claim whatever, but you have to validate that claim by the given authority. So if I give you a token that is signed by my dog and it claims that I'm over 21, well, maybe you don't trust a paw print as an authoritative signature. But if it's got the state hologram on it, then you do trust it. And so that's why it's called a claim, because you're making a claim, but it still is subject to the application needs to make sure that whoever has issued that token, you trust, and you trust them to be privileged to be able to make those claims authoritatively. So again, I know it's terse technical language, but so it is. All right, so I'm gonna just put that here, OIDC standard claims for reference. All right. So then here, with the access claims, if I specify an object, it means that it's going to be able to issue a token for that object. And so that's all I'm saying here, is that this can issue an access claim. And when I log in, it's going to allow a refresh claim by default. And then on logout, what I'm going to need to do is we need to delete cookie, but that's not enough because we can't guarantee that the user will delete the cookie because they could inspect the cookie in their browser and whatnot. So logging out delete cookie is not enough. Direct to delete ID token, but then we're going to invalidate in session database. So, and feel free to ask me, more questions. Just try to be as specific as possible because as I'm jumping back and forth, I often, lose context of what it was 10 seconds ago. My short-term memory is particularly bad. Okay, so if all we did right now was just this, I don't think I have to do anything else. I think that that is good enough. We've got the cookie. So if I were to just refresh this, I think that's all I got to do to solve that first problem. Let's see. We'll bring this up here. We got internal server error. I went ahead, I implemented it. Granted, it doesn't have the database bits that it needs. And now we have a different server error. But let's go ahead and check out what that is, because I think it's going to be something useful. Cannot read properties of undefined. And I know why that is. I do know why that is. Whoops. Let's go ahead and leave that there. And that is because I did the wrong thing here. So what we have is authn dot... I'm going to have to go look at the documentation for this real quick. Auth 3000. And this is bogus. They're not actually, well, I'll go check on it and see, but there are not actually security vulnerabilities in the code. There was a tooling dependency, and this is the main branch, and we need to be looking at the refactor branch because, yeah. So I don't even use Axios. All right. So here we are, and I need to get down to the exchange. Whoops. And we'll take a look at the exchange handler. Here it is. So authn.jws.claims. That's what we need right there. And then I do need this session database stuff. And, oh, I do need to check this. Actually, I could just copy this function right here. This is actually exactly what I need. So I'm just going to copy that straight from the documentation. And we'll do a set paste there so that everything pastes well. And then I'll get rid of this stuff except for the to-do. Well, I don't need the to-do because that code is there as well. Okay. By the way, not many people know this, but JWS, so you've heard of JWT, which some people call JOT. JWS is the technical term for when a JWT has been decoded. So it is a JWS when it's decoded, and it is a JWT when it is encoded. Just a little bit of the standard terminology there. And we are going to need a session. It's going to be sessions, and this is going to be, do we want, I think we want to leave that as ID and then revoke that null. Yep, that'll be good. If not session, throw new error, revoked off. That's good enough for now. Yeah, most of this is actually right on target. So where did my find or create? I don't need find or create. Find will do just fine. But I'm going, do we have a user.find yet? We do have a user.find. Well, no, that's this right here. So this should be fine. User.find. I'll have to go double check on that, but I think it would be a UUID for this is what we would use. And then we will switch on the strategy, and if it's a refresh, we will issue ID claims. And I want to say we'll issue both. And access claims. And then we don't actually have a role, so I'm just going to let that be. All right, so that'll just be empty. And so then we're going to return whatever the ID claims are and whatever the access claims are. And I guess access claims ought to be the same here. Yeah, let's... Oh, okay, so this has role user. Yeah, I don't care about that. And then I don't care about this either. So I guess what I do care about is, let's go back up to where we had selected the identifier and stuff. User.identifiers. Is that what we're getting here? User.identifiers. What else? User dot first name, last name, yada, 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 yada. Cool. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it down, and I'm going to put it, I guess, right about here. That seems that would make sense. And then we're going to copy this stuff about email into the ID token. So ideally, you want your tokens to be as lightweight as possible. Or maybe not as possible, but as reasonable. And so my ID claims, I'm going to put stuff about the user's ID in it. But my access claims, I'm not. Because the access claims don't say who the person is, they just say what they're allowed to do. But typically we're going to put the sub, meaning the user's true primary ID, in there anyway. What is this complaining about? Unreachable let after return. Okay, then we'll get rid of this return right there. And that will be about right. Now I need to go in the migrations for this. I need to go create a session. And I think what I'm going to do is I've got one that's probably going to work. I'm going to go on the other screen real quick and log into a different server where I already have some of this code that I can probably just copy and paste. But I'm just going to go check real quick and make sure that this is kosher. Because it's pretty generic stuff. Session table, it's not nothing earth-shattering about having a sessions table. So let's see, serve. Nope, that's not where I want to be. I want to be in a dev, and I'm going to go to, let's see, DB migrations, and so I'll bring this back over on the other screen in just a second. Session, track session, no. Let's do, gosh. I'm going to look at the JTI. Okay, I've got a log session function. I got a models session. I got a track session. Okay. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Pretty generic stuff here. And this is basically... oh, whoops. There's an oopsie. I'll have to fix that later. Well, I guess I don't have to fix it later. Yep. Okay, cool. This actually is probably the minimal set. I'm going to bring this over in just a second. You'll see. This is probably the minimal set of what you want for a session table. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that around. Whoops. So we're going to do npm, or not npm, npx. We don't even need to do that. We'll just set this migration up with what's today's date. October 13th, and it is 11:52, and then something something. I'm going to say add session. There we go. So I'm going to paste this in. There we are. And this is about as simple as it gets. I think there's maybe some relations in here. Oh yeah, I could have put the references in a different place. I don't know if I ought to have done this way. I don't remember what size we want those strings, but I like putting a size to the string. I don't know if I want to cap that. How long are IP addresses as a string? What's an IPv6 address? IPv6 is how long? Let's just see if we can get a full one. There we go. That's what a full one looks like. So let's say we wanted to handle an IPv6 address. Dot length is 39, really? Because of the colons. So it's not going to be longer than 39. So let's say 39, there, 39. And we'll say IPv6 string, full IPv6 string is, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is 32 plus 7 chars. All right, and then user agent strings, those are forever long. Let's just go check that out real quick. What's my user agent? And let's just see. Okay, that's hecka long, but I still don't think it's quite over 255 characters. Let's see, 120. Yeah, so it could be twice as long. I think it's probably fair to cap the user agent at 255. Now, how this gets translated will depend on the database, but it's essentially going to be the longest varchar before text, because if you don't cap the string size at all, then it can become a text blob. And text blobs are less efficient both in storing them and indexing them and all the things. So let's see. Okay, so we've got the ID of the session, which I'm tempted to call this SID instead for session ID. And I'm calling it SID instead of UUID, or in most of my tables I call the ID UUID, but if it's not a UUID, then I call it something else. And rather than just calling it ID, I'm calling it SID because, I don't know, because I am. Okay, so then there's effective ID. This means the user ID. And then we have the impersonator ID. And then we have an account ID, which is something that we don't really need to worry about right now. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it in there anyway. So this would be, I think is it users? Let me see the way the other tables are in here. Whoops. Fish. Okay. Migrations. User table. Did we call it users? We did. So I'm just going to stick with, I think it's a bad convention to do plural, but I made the mistake of doing it. So, you know, when you're in a hole, the important thing is that you just keep digging. So that's what we're going to do here, is we're just going to keep on digging. And then we don't actually have a concept of accounts separate from users right now. And I'm going to call that FK for foreign key, because that's how I've been doing it in this. And then these, whatever. Strategy. Strategy is something that I'm not going to go into doing this, but I'm just going to put a to-do here. To-do, make enum table. Because we can list out what the strategies are, most likely. It's OIDC. Do we have issuer? We don't have issuer in there? I guess we are the issuer, so that makes sense. But the strategy of how this was created might be refresh. It's a limited set of things that it can be. So we could make an enum table for that. I don't use enums in databases because you get all of the disadvantages of having enums, but if you just create a table and you store a limited, if you have a table and all you ever have in it is 3 values, who cares? Then you can use that as a foreign key reference and you've effectively created an enum. So with very minor performance penalty because it's a tiny table. The whole thing is, pretty much going to be hot in memory the whole, whenever. Okay, so we have identifier type. I also want to put in here identifier value. And so this is going to be, for example, this also could have an enum table. And so there we go. Created at, updated at, and revoked at. So that's cool enough. And the reason that I put effective and impersonator in here is because generally you're going to want some sort of back-end admin interface to all of your things. And you're going to want to be able to impersonate users. So John's having trouble with his account. Support staff is talking with John. They want to be able to click a button that says impersonate John. However, whatever they do while they are John should be logged as the support tech, right? So if John's account goes and does something unscrupulous, we want to be able to say, wait a minute, this wasn't John. This was actually somebody on the inside abusing their privileges. Of course, that only works, that'd be your support level 1 and 2 techs. That wouldn't be your support level 3 and 4 techs because, of course, they would be able to manipulate the database. But they're also getting paid really well. Your people that are at that level, the lower the level the person is at, the more likely they are someone is to gain their influence by, whether it's revenge or monetary means or whatever. So you have to have these guards in place when you think about how much is the person getting paid, right? You think about TSA agents. Do they make the place more secure? No, they're not getting paid enough to make the place more secure. Right. And if your gatekeepers are your lowest paid people, then you don't have very good gates because they're very easy to capture their influence. But your high level people, the people that actually have access to the database, hopefully they're getting paid pretty well. And so, they don't have building anger and resentment or, something in against the company because they could just leave. They're powerful enough they could go find another job. Anyway, it's not always true and it's not perfect, but just some things to keep in mind. Okay, so now we've got the sessions table. And revoked at, because we don't ever want to delete a session. We want to revoke a session so that we always have an audit trail. Who logged in? When did they log in? Who impersonated who? When did they do it? So we know when something was created, we know when it was updated, we know when it was revoked. And the thing that I do is anytime there's an impersonation, it doesn't matter what type of token it is, we log the impersonation in the sessions table. If it's a normal login, we don't need to log all of the little refreshes. We just need to get the main login. But anyway, so we're going to stick. I'm not actually going to use that information right now as part of this because I don't currently have that ability, but I'm just going to leave it in there because it's useful. Let's see, and we got the references. I actually want to do this the same way I'm doing it in the other table. So let me see if I can find that real quick. Migrations. What was it? Payments. Did I call it payments? Yeah. Let's go to payments. I'm going to take a look at foreign. There we go. Constraints. So I'm going to take a look at this, and I'll look at that comment that you just said that you understand the impersonator thing now. Okay. So I do want to move this. Let me take this down to references. So foreign, effective, FK, references, deferrable, deferred. Yep. Let's do that. And then we'll do the same thing with the other one, which was impersonator. And this is essentially the same thing as what we had here. So I could just... By the way, I've been trying to figure out where I came up with that sound because I'm sure it's from something. I'm thinking it could also come from an old show something similar to Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie, where there's a and then something appears. It could have been from Willy Wonka. It could be something out of a video game. But I'm trying to figure out if that sound came to me from somewhere. So if you know, let me know. Of course, I'm not replicating it perfectly with my mouth. Okay, so that's good. So we got our constraints in there. We got our timestamps. We got our credential info, our device info, and then session IDs. Okay, cool. So this looks good. And that's pretty generic. I think, so I'm going to turn Auth 3000 to an auth in a box solution where it has all the tables and the code and all the logic, and it's just kind of, you plug in your IDs for, say, Google, and you design your front end code to have the interface that you want, and then boom, it's got whatever you need there. That's what I'm getting towards, but it takes a few implementations to be able to do that. You don't sit down and make all those decisions. What you do is well, I guess you can, but you're going to make them wrong. But you go through this a few different times in a few different scenarios, and the correct solution presents itself. I'm over on my other screen looking at some code from another project real quick. All right, so I got some relationship stuff there. And then let's see. I'll go look at the auth stuff here. I also need to implement email stuff. I still got to do that. Maybe I'll implement the magic link. Okay, let's see. What do we got here? User ID claims, refresh, session model, find by ID, where revoked null. That all looks decent. If not session, throw unauthorized. Okay, and I do need to, let's go take a look at libuser and see what find is like for user. Because we've got find or create, okay, which calls find, so that's good. And then yeah, the user bit is actually quite complex because you do have some relationships that you pretty much always want to return with a user, such as their list of identifiers, that being you want their primary email as well as their non-primary emails, their email aliases. You want them to be able to log in either as their business account or their user account. So you have this concept of a user. There's multiple identifiers associated with that user. And then there's their primary identifier. Like I said, that's their user ID. And then yeah, phone number could be an identifier. Typically things that you could use to log in. Okay, so we do want a lib. What have we got here right now? I think we do want a lib session.js. Whoops, that didn't work out the way I thought it would. Use strict. Let me go back into the lib user. And I'm going to grab this one. Yeah, this one's quite complex actually. Or yeah, I mean it's doing query building and stuff. I've for a while I was in the camp of not using any SQL tools, just doing raw query strings. But I've come back around to, I think Connects is the right level of abstraction because it lets you build queries that are guaranteed to be correct. You can get some of your tooling can work with it. The main problem with raw query strings is I've not found a good solution for using your tooling inside the code, because your tooling is not going to look inside your JavaScript, look inside of a string, and then say, oh yeah, this is a SQL string. Let me lint that for you. Let me make sure that you didn't spell anything wrong. So if you're using connects, you can get some of those benefits. And that's where I'm at right now. Okay, so let's do session, and we probably won't even need all that, but this will be session, and we're going to find sessions dot. But I don't think we're going to need that because we're not actually going to join here from. So we probably just do select star. Whoops, let me do it this way. Cut that from sessions. We're not